Andrew, rogue wrenching, spark plugs. Today we're going to be replacing the spark plugs on this 2011 Ford Explorer. This is going to cover 2011 through, I believe, 2019 Ford Explorer 3.5 liter V6 spark plugs. Here we go, let's dive in. The first step is to remove the foam. So now with the foam removed, you can see the 3 coil packs on the front there, and there are 3 coil packs underneath the intake manifold there. Now this is just the upper intake manifold that we're going to have to take off to access those back spark plugs. So to do this job properly, you need to change all 6 spark plugs. The previous repair on this car was they changed just the front spark plugs because those are the easy ones to get to. So it's really important to do all of them when you do the job. This intake comes off pretty easy, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Step 1, remove this air intake tube. There are 2 hoses to remove. One's right here and one is here on the back. They're both spring clamps and pretty easy to get off. You're going to need to remove the wiring pigtails for the purge solenoid as well as the electronic throttle body control. Don't take this hose off because that's coolant and we don't need to open up the cooling system today. You will also need to remove this evap hose right here, which goes to your evap purge solenoid. To remove it, there are 2 tabs on the right hand side and you're going to squeeze them together and push in like so. Once the clip has popped out like that, simply wiggle the line and it comes right off. And you can just roll it out of the way like that. Next, we're going to take off these 2 vacuum hoses. Now that everything is unhooked or disconnected from the intake manifold, it's time to unbolt it. It's kind of hard to see, but down in this hole, there is an 8mm bolt that holds the back of the intake manifold. You're going to access it with an extension underneath the throttle body, but you can see the bolt head through there with a flashlight. So I'm using a rather cobbled together set of extensions with a 8mm chrome wobble on the end to access that bolt. You can get on this with a straight, it's just a little bit easier if you've got a wobble socket. But you're gonna need about that much extension to be able to easily get in there and get to it. So like I said, we're gonna come here underneath the throttle body. And if you look right above the motor controller, you can see where you're going with it. And there it is. So we're gonna remove that bolt. Be careful not to drop it because it's a lot easier to get it before you drop it. And there it is. The next step is going to be to loosen. This wire harness right here is held in by a clip underneath. Take your little pin popper underneath and pop it out, allowing that harness to flex a little bit over so you can get to the bolt behind it. Next, we're going to remove the intake bolts. There are short bolts here along the base and back there, and then there is one long bolt right there. Once all the bolts are loose, you can lift up the intake and work it out. So now with the intake removed, you can see there's plenty of access to get to these back coils and plugs. Honestly, everything in this engine bay is pretty easy to get to once you pull out that upper intake. So these clips, when they're new, and unless you've broken them, have a little red lock tab right here. So you take a screwdriver or your finger and pop that red lock tab up, and then push down right here with your finger. Usually a thumb works pretty good, and push down on that and wiggle. And there you go. So all you gotta do is spin out this one 8mm bolt and then pull straight up. Next, you're gonna want a 5/8 spark plug socket on about a 6-inch extension to get down onto that spark plug. Always remove spark plugs by hand. If the spark plug does not come up with your socket and it's loose, simply take a magnet and fish it out. The previous person who did this repair only replaced the front 3 spark plugs, and they put in Autolite spark plugs. Now, I want this repair to last a long time, so Motorcraft factory spark plugs. These are going to be your SP, what are these things? These are going to be SP520s. That's the factory plug that Ford put in there, and that is the best plug money can buy. And it's also not even the most expensive plug, so put in factory stuff. When comparing these spark plugs, there are a couple things to note. One is the overall height of the spark plug. Notice the Autolite is slightly shorter than the Motorcraft. Also, notice this is a copper plug and this is a double platinum plug. This plug is going to last and run a whole lot smoother than this plug is. These are platinum plugs. They come in this little sleeve to protect the gap. That means the gap has been set at the factory. If you use a gapping tool to set the gap, you may damage the platinum coating on the end of the electrode there. So don't play with gap. If it comes with this plastic and it's a platinum spark plug, just put it in and run it. Now, I like to run a little dab of clean motor oil on the threads just to help it from sticking or having any issue with threads. So just a quick drop of clean motor oil and then install the spark plug, and these get torqued down to 11 foot-pounds. Okay, spark plug goes in. Always start your spark plugs by hand. Don't ever use a tool to start them, otherwise you may cross thread them and damage the head. So start by hand, and you're going to want to run it all the way in. When you feel it stop, grab a torque wrench and torque to 11 foot-pounds. If you don't have a torque wrench, I would just go borrow one to avoid damaging your head, but snug but not super tight is kind of the layman's terms for how tight this thing ends up being. And there it is. As this tightens up, you'll feel it seat against the head, and you want it to go just a tiny bit more than that, and that's about 11 foot-pounds. I'm using Napa Belden Max Coil on plug boots. So what these guys are is the new Coil boots. So our coil looks like this, and so basically we're just replacing this end piece. That end piece, just kind of twist it. See the rubbers start to come apart. You might need something like a pocket screwdriver to work that rubber off of there. So that's what the bare coil looks like. Your new boot is going to come with a spring, and you simply slip it right on the end, and that's all there is to it. Whenever you're doing this, you always want to use a little bit of dielectric grease. Just take and give it a little spurt right in the end, and that's all you need. That will help to keep moisture out of the electrical contacts and just overall make the job last longer. And then simply reinstall this and you're good to go. Simply install the coil, push it in firmly, install your bolt, and connect your pigtail. Once it's locked in, be sure to push the lock tab back down. You're going to repeat that procedure for all 6 spark plugs. I wanted to show you this. This is what carbon tracking looks like. It's a little line or set of lines running down the side of the plug, and if you try to wipe it off, it's still there. It almost looks like a crack. And this is why it's so important to replace these coil boot ends, because basically what's happened is the spark plug up here has worn out so much that the amount of energy required to jump that gap is less than the amount of energy to arc down the side of the plug to here. That's why this car had a misfire under load, but the thing is, when it starts arcing like that, it creates this carbon trail, and that carbon trail is also imprinted on the rubber boot. So if you replace just this plug, but you don't replace the boot, there's still a trail or a pathway for that spark to jump. So that's why it's so important to replace the boots when you do spark plugs, whether or not you're having this issue. But the spark plug here is the problem that was giving us our misfire under load. So I just want to show you guys that real quick. Let's get back to the rest of these. The intake manifold on these cars is technically reusable, and as long as it's still sticking down from, if you look here, you can see that it's sticking up past the manifold, it theoretically is okay to reuse. However, a new gasket is like $11, and so I'm going to go ahead and replace it while I've got this apart. It's pretty easy to replace. Simply take a screwdriver and pop the edge out and pull the old one out and pop the new one in, and then push the gasket in all the way around. This gasket does go on dry. Just like that, and then bolt your intake back on. And then your air intake. Make sure that it's seated all the way in and that you get both clamps tight. Don't forget to connect this little hose, and it goes right there. That's all there is to doing spark plugs in a 3.5 liter motor in a Ford Escape. This is very similar procedure for the Ford Fusion and Ford Edge that use the same motor. This procedure should work for 2011 up through 2019 Ford products. The bolt in the back is really easy to get to, and guys, please don't leave it out because you'll end up with damage to your intake manifold because of the strain of having that big intake hanging way out there. That is unsupported if you leave the bolt out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like this video if you did, subscribe if you found it helpful, and there's gonna be more videos on this car coming up in the near future. We'll see you guys very, very soon.